On the podcast today, we are going to talk about the spiritual significance of the story of Krishna and Arjuna, how to find our Dharma, which path of yoga we should follow, everything that the story of Krishna and Arjuna is about, basically the story of the Bhagavad Gita, right? And so I'm joined by the wise Guy Young again, and to do a little bit of housekeeping, for those who don't know the Bhagavad Gita is actually a small part of the much larger Mahabharata. And the Mahabharata is probably considered the largest poem in history, 200,000 verses. So if you ever plan on reading the whole epic, maybe take a few years off, especially if there's commentaries. So, and the Mahabharata is considered an itihasa text. So itihasa text means history. So according to the author, Vyasa, it's recorded history. And the Bhagavad Gita is an essential part, actually, of the Mahabharata. And it got a lot of notoriety in the last few hundred years, especially because, I think because when the British were in India, because of their Christian mentality, they have this belief that there should be one book, one holy book, and so they found...
Yeah, they needed a Bible.
They needed their own Bible to make sense of Hinduism for themselves, right? Yeah. And as we know now, that there is no one book for Hinduism. There's the Vedas, there's the Upanishads, there's the Mahabharata, there's the Puranas. There's many, many, many texts. And so, but in saying that, the Bhagavad Gita is essential because it makes up a third of the Prasthana Trahi, which are the three core texts of Vedanta, which is the Bhagavad Gita, the Brahma Sutras, and the Upanishads. And we'll get into Vedanta later. But that's kind of to set the stage, because the Bhagavad Gita itself is basically the setting is a war, right? And it's the famous Kurukshetra war. So in that area kind of northern India up there. And it's a war for many reasons, and we can get into probably the allegorical understanding of that later as well. But it's a war between two families, the Pandavas and the Kauravas, and Arjuna is one of the princes of the Pandavas, right? And so the story begins in great doubt, great confusion, because Arjuna doesn't want to fight his family members, his cousins, and so forth and so on, who are in the Kauravas. So, but then we have Krishna there. So Krishna is this, we could say the lead actor in the story, or he's the guide for Arjuna. He's the charioteer, and he explains a lot of things. And so, to set that sort of spiritual understanding of the story, I'll read to you just a brief verse. And so we have two key verses, actually, which talks about, which is getting into kind of the theme of the Gita, when we talk about selflessness and the dissolution of I. So Krishna says, "To action alone hast thou a right, and never at all to its fruits. Let not the fruits of action be thy motive, neither let there be in thee any attachment to inaction. Fixed in yoga, do thy work, O winner of wealth, Arjuna, abandoning attachment with an even mind in success and failure, for evenness of mind is called yoga." And so the one with the steady mind, the one that's not blown here or there. And, interesting in the first part, Krishna is big time talking about not being attached to the fruits of your labor, fighting your cousins, not being like attached or overthinking about that. So, and that's why actually nishkarma karma is one of the most important Sanskrit words, because that's what it is. It's about remaining active but inwardly effortless. So it's very similar to Wu-Wei in that respect. So, and that kind of sets the stage of kind of the attitude Krishna is trying to inculcate into Arjuna?
Yeah, the story itself it's hard to just get the one big lesson out of this story, because there is so many ways to look at these stories, I guess. Again, that Nishkam Karma aspect is a kind of actually one of the biggest teaching of the story. That yes, he is in a big dilemma there as a warrior. He is part of the Kshatriya caste, which you were born to fight. You were born to be a warrior. So that is your duty. That is your duty given from God. So that's what you were supposed to do. But then you will have to fight against your own cousins, your own family. So what should he do? Like, that's his confusion. And the Krishna gives the advice that not being attached to your own personal reason, and worrying about what will cause in a personal way from that action, from him taking the action. Yeah. So I think that confusing moment, it can be applied to every one of us, right? Like in any life situation, not literally same situation as an Arjuna situation, but in a situation, I know this is maybe you might think this. I know this is not a right thing to be doing, but that something that you have to do, right? And in that situation, how do we deal with it?
Exactly. So you may not want to do it, but it's something that you have to do.
Yes.
It's and how many times do we live? We all experience those moments in our life, right?
Yes, yes.
And so, and what I love about the Gita itself is the Bhagavad Gita. Remember, there's many Gitas. I shouldn't say the Gita, but the Bhagavad Gita is that it's different than any other sort of like holy scripture, so to speak, because it's set in a war, right? Like it's a war, and it's about fighting family members and that. And when Vyasa was writing this, the spiritual like level that Vyasa was at, probably understood that this sort of story is an eternal story that has very deep significance for all of us, because it is set in a war. It's set in a situation of extreme doubt. It's not set in a marketplace or, should I buy fish or pork today? Like, what's you know what I mean? It's set in a setting that's probably the worst. That probably was him thinking of the worst type of situation that could ever be, right? Like you got to fight, you got to essentially kill your family members. But the point of the story is about one of the points of the story is about surrender. It's about surrendering to the will of, in this case, Vishnu, because Krishna is an incarnation of Vishnu, and Vishnu being a representation of Brahman. Because this is a Vaishnava text, it's not a Shaiva text, and so surrendering to that. So what is actually required of me? And one of the things, especially one of the prevailing themes in all of Hindu thought is about surrendering to the will of that which is, let's just say the will of Brahman, no matter whether Shaiva or Vaishnava. So even when we talk about the Varna system, when we're talking about the caste system, the whole idea of, or one of the original ideas of that was just submitting to whatever you were born into. And I know that became problematic as we went down the line, and most of us don't support that, obviously, but that's one of the central themes, is this surrender and just playing your part and not letting your ego get in the way to confuse matters. So essentially the great doubt was Arjuna's jiva, right? His jiva personality was the one that lived in great doubt, where Krishna is going, reside in the Atman. If you live from the Atman, you will do what is required, not because it's your personal will, but because it's the impersonal will. It's the impersonal will of Brahman.
Yeah, so when you come from the personal will, always there's a analytical thinking comes into place, so that kind of becomes an obstacle to see the real vision of what is going on. And so this is the thing, you must act not for your personal gain, but the welfare of the world. And this is the main theme of the story, that before think from your own personal ego, you need to think of what duty is at hand in that moment, right? It's and I think Vyasa set that story in that, like you said, is quite an extreme situation, because that's how significant the message is, I think. So that even in that extreme situation, you must act not out of your own will. You must act out of God's will, and you must embrace that role and that duty that's given from God, which is much bigger than yourself.
Yeah, yourself. Yeah. Yeah. So you have to, in a sense, just submit to that, to the will of Brahman, right? Like to the will of, in this case, Vishnu. And so, and this is the entire story is Vishnu trying to convince Arjuna of this mentality, and explaining that there are different temperaments and this and that. He's trying to explain, like, for those who don't know, I mentioned Dharma earlier, but Dharma in the context of the Gita is a sort of like your intrinsic nature, right? Like your intrinsic. It's very similar to De and Li in Taoism, like where De is like this virtue and Li is kind of this organic pattern or constitution an individual has. And for Arjuna, his organic constitution, or his intrinsic nature, was princely and part of the warrior, the caste, right? Like the Kshatriyas are the warriors and the nobility, like, and so he was part. That was just his intrinsic nature, and trying to fight that is where the great confusion comes, right? Like, so. And we've also all seen this in our own lives, right? Like, we may be good at something, but then we look at someone else who are doing something different than what you are, and you go, I want to do that. But then you try that, and you're useless at it, but you were already good at something else you were perfectly fine, but you weren't content with, the intrinsic virtue that the all has given you, so to speak.
I think the reason why Arjuna was in great conflict within himself is that, like, accepting that very fact is very challenging, I think. And for anyone who are in the similar situation, or like you mentioned, that kind of example, or just the life in general, that you, instead of you concentrate on your own life that is given to you, you keep looking elsewhere, and how you kind of feel yourself more pitiful of yourself and whatnot. But instead, if you just accept the life that's given, and that opens a whole different outlook in life, I think. Yeah. But accepting that fact is, I think, it's very challenging for everyone.
For everyone, yeah. Yeah. Because we're so identified with the jiva. We're so identified with who we are, and so we want to, think we can explore and do anything, and that's not really so much the case. Like as a person, as a human being, we have certain limitations that sort of need to be respected in some sense too, right? Like, once we start to accept our own limitations as a human being, that's when we start to open our heart and fall into a whole different field. This whole dialogue is actually very similar to the imaginary dialogue of Zhuangzi with Confucius and Lao Tzu. Confucius is trying to think that the world is a certain way and he can control certain events and circumstances of life, where Lao Tzu's saying you got to let go. It's all good. The course of nature will run its course. No matter whether you want to change it or not, it's still going to run its course. Like.
Yeah, that's right. Lots have pointed out that the very will the Confucius that want to change according to his opinion of what's good and bad, that itself is a flaw. Yeah. So that here is the same, like what Arjuna thinks that killing your own family is good or bad, that's the confusion. But you fulfill the duty what's there, and the rest of it will just take care of itself.
Take care of itself, yeah. You're overthinking about it.
Yes.
You're overthinking about it, essentially. Like, you're in your own way, and you are not allowing the universe to function through you effortlessly, you know. Because you've got this blockage, which is the ego. This jiva acts as a blockage to the fundamental forces of the universe. And fundamental forces of the universe in this story is Vishnu. Vishnu cannot do its thing in its way because you are essentially you're confused and you're trying to control the situation. I don't want to kill my cousins and I don't want to do this and that, you know. It's a whole... and see, this is, and it's interesting because a lot of the Eastern spiritual paths are amoral. And so that's why when a lot of like people of Abrahamic faiths read the Bhagavad Gita, they get very like confused as to why it's a war and why things like morality are not highlighted, but it's a much higher spiritual tradition than being confused with things like morality and this and that. That's for people like Confucius and Christians and so forth and so on. It's not really for, say, if we look at Taoism, Buddhism, Hinduism, those sort of paths are about attaining the ultimate. So you can't attain the ultimate through worrying about moral dispositions. And so, but in saying that, there's, you know, the whole story is about it has nothing to do with morality, so to speak. It's about the moral imperative actually is what Vishnu wants of you. That's the moral imperative. Your own personal moral imperative doesn't mean jack, you know. So that's the whole point there.
Yeah, I mean, as long as the person is there, that person will always be obstruct your from you fulfilling your dharma.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and
that's one of the main. Well, that's actually what the story represents to all of us, right? How do we fulfill our dharma? How do we? It's a life manual, right? How do we move through our life efficaciously without incurring any harm on ourselves or incurring any harm on others? So how do we do that? You know, and so. As we know in the story, Krishna explains 3 paths. So we have bhakti, karma, jnana. And when we say this, we're talking about yoga here, yogic paths. And sure, there are other paths of yoga, but these are the 3 main paths of yoga in the Bhagavad Gita. And so when we talk about bhakti, we're talking about the path of love or devotion. And if we talk about karma, the yoga of action and work, so to speak, and in jnana, we're talking about the yoga of wisdom and knowledge, self-knowledge, basically. So, and jnana yoga actually is related to Advaita Vedanta, so the path of non-dual self knowledge of the self. So, when you think of Gaudapada and you think of Shankara, they are essentially jnanis, and people would say someone like Ramana Maharshi is a jnani, right? So, and we'll unpack all of these paths. So, and this is basically what Vishnu is explaining to Arjuna, that you have everyone has different personality traits, and their dharma actually gravitates to either of these sorts of 3 things. Whatever your vocation is through these things doesn't really matter.
Yeah, again, all those 3 paths are not one or the other is better or worse or anything like that. It's just completely depends on individuals' temperament and personalities. And what resonates you the most, you will follow that path. And that that's why those three paths are there for, right? So and each path complement each other as well. When you follow, say if you're a bhakti, you as well as be a karma and jnana yoga as well, but more likely, predominantly, you would practice bhakti path and something like that.
In saying that, there's like what Shankara mentions, and a lot of other teachers may say this, is that often it's those who follow jnana yoga are the ones who experience moksha, for the fact that jnana is to do with the knowingness of Brahman. So what I mean by that is bhakti is love towards Vishnu or Shiva, love towards Brahman. So you're in a love affair, right? You're devoted to Vishnu or Shiva, and same with karma. You're kind of in service to Vishnu or Shiva, as representations of Brahman. But jnana seek to understand and be that.
Well, that's why path of jnana is the fastest
direct
track,
path. Direct path. Yeah, exactly.
Fastest and direct path to enlightenment, right?
Yeah.
Because of that reason, that instead of you are trying to understand yourself as a representation of Brahman, so being an Atman itself, through devotional rituals and practices, or through karma, meaning you being a great service to the community or things like that. But just to the very effort to study and to know what that is the fastest.
And to abide in it. To abide in it, not just to know it as something else, but to be it. So where the Atman and the Brahman become one. That's what happens with the great jnanis, right? It's not, whereas still with the bhakti and the karmi, usually there is you're in service to, or you're in love with. You are not the love of Brahman. You haven't sort of merged. And this is actually why a lot of the great teachers throughout time have been jnanis, right? Because they have an ability to articulate and explain to people so that they can, compute the information and really digest it. This is why bhaktis and karmis go to a jnani.
Yeah, so that's why bhakti and karmic path, those two paths, there is something in between, kind of.
Yeah.
You as an Atman and the God being Brahman, but feels like there is something in between to go through, instead of jnani being more like none of that exists. It's just a kind of direct path. I think so that's why I think a lot of people often have a misunderstanding and misunderstanding of these things, because they often like to identify what Brahman is through devotion and through karmic path, so that they misidentify through that devotional act or karmic act to what Brahman is, I think.
Yes. There can be a lot of delusion there too, as you know, a lot of New Age spirituality is basically bhakti spirituality. It's devotion to, and then as a lot of great swamis say, if one of the inherent problems that can happen if you're following bhakti yoga or karma yoga is that there's still, like what you were alluding to, an act of separation, where jnana yoga is the complete dissolution of the I. It's a non-dual path. So essentially, that's why jnana yoga is Advaita Vedanta.
Yes, it's somewhat you are depending on certain acts to reach enlightenment, so to say.
Moksha.
Yeah. So, the devotion or the service to people becomes kind of crutches to your self-realization. And more you get attached to it, the more you will misidentify what enlightening experience is.
Well, that's why, as you said earlier, if you're going to be practicing any path of those three, you have to be practicing the other paths as well. So even if you're a Jnani, a Jnani still has, obviously reverence and love for Brahman because they know what it is, and they're in service in a sense because they have satsang and they teach others, right? And so for a bhakti and a karmi, they have to. It is important to study and to try and attain jnana, self-knowledge, to knowledge of the self, knowledge of Brahman, basically, knowledge of Atman. And so, because that's actually where moksha is. It's not in the, this is what Shankara tried to explain in the Atma Bodha text, self-knowledge text, is that you need to understand that to abide in the Atman, to understand the full realization, is jnana. It's not karma or bhakti. It's jnana, because jnana means self-knowledge. It means, the knowledge of Brahman within yourself. And so, which is a non-dual understanding. That's Advaita, right? So, and so that's one of the that's a lot of the problems if you are only a bhakti or a karmi, and that's your path. But in saying that, Krishna does explain that to Arjuna in the sense that we do have certain personality types, and they are efficacious attitude and path to move down for if you have that certain personality type, or your intrinsic dharma is more attracted to that. And so your vocation and everything will reflect, your work will reflect that, how you live your life will reflect that. Like often a lot of bhaktis will have families and so forth and so on. A lot of jnanis won't have families. They'll be more solitary and more about the teachings and delivering the teachings to other people. And karmis may have families and this and that, but they're usually workers and very honest people. And so you have those three paths filtered through all sorts of work and attitudes in life. And so that's one of the central themes of the Gita, is teaching those three paths to follow your own dharma. So if you have that sort of love and devotion in your heart, that's kind of your temperament, then yeah, sure, follow that, because that's your dharma, and what you do in life will resonate with that. But you still need to remember what we spoke about. You still need to remember that even though that you will have that love in your heart for Vishnu or for Shiva, it's not going to give you liberation.
Yeah, I think it's actually not that easy to find your own path, what your dharmic path is really, right?
Yeah.
Somehow you have to try it all to find out what fits you.
But I think that a lot of it's accidental, right? Like it's if you look at the story, like if Arjuna just stops trying and just allows life to do as it will, he'll be following his dharma. I think that a lot of the problems these days in the modern world is we're all trying to essentially find certain things that we resonate with, or we see other people and we compare our lives to that, and then we want to do what they do. But you didn't really come across it naturally. How you came across music, how I came across writing, never seeked it out. It just sort of happened. So that's how we need to operate. Well, it's hard to say, right? Because not everyone has the same opportunities. But in saying that, maybe if you have less opportunities, you still may find something that resonates with your heart a lot more. If you have too many options, that may muddle your brain, and you may not find your particular your path.
You might get to have too much distractions in the end, and then you might misidentify your own temperament with something else.
Yes,
yeah. No
doubt. And so, a lot of the questions that I get is how do you follow our Dharma according to the story of Arjuna and Krishna, you know. And well, it is a lot about allowing life to just run its course without trying, right? It's very, again, Hinduism and especially Taoism are very similar in that regard. Instead of trying to force your way upon life, just accepting your life as where it is now, right? It doesn't mean you have to be in that state forever, but you need to come to the conclusion that this is where I'm at, you know?
I think what often we get disappointed by is that we want to attain and achieve things ASAP, right? But when we talk about this Dharma and the spiritual path, it's actually a whole lifetime journey, isn't it? It's something that, it's not something that you make and build and that you have overnight. It's a long process of looking within yourself and purging your bed stocked inside, and somehow you need to transform it. All this process is actually it can be very effortful at times, because you will have to give an effort to transform yourself. You don't get transformed without trying, right? So that it's a long life journey, and you need to, each day by day, you need to remind yourself that to be on the right path.
Of course. And it's about like coming back to that nishkarma karma mentality. Like no matter what temperament you are, within all three, you follow nishkarma karma. You are not attached to the fruits of your own labor. You know that something else is moving through you, and you're essentially acting as like a limb of the universe. And so whatever happens for you in your life is just a result of that. You know, it's like when people say, I want to do something, I want to be a writer, I want to be a film director, and this and that. From the Gita's perspective is that you should be focused just on your temperament, whatever your temperament is, your yogic temperament. And whatever happens because of that, you know. So if you're a bhakti, then you should be going to temple a few times a day, you know, chanting and...
chanting and attending a bhajan.
Yeah, all of these things. But the perfected being, you know, as one of the main essentials in the Bhagavad Gita is the perfected being harnesses all three. So they have jnana, they have karma, they have bhakti. So they have love in their heart, love and devotion for their heart, for life, all life, and for Brahman. They are in service to humanity, but they also have the knowledge of Brahman. So they have all three, embodied all three.
Yeah.
And that's why it's taught to, even if you are bhakti, make sure you are studying and this and that. And even if you are a jnani, make sure you do hold satsang and, you know, and this and that. Make sure you do still attend temple and you know.
Yeah, just appreciating all different paths as well, isn't it?
Yeah, of course.
And you use it for your own benefit and to remind yourself all the time.
Yeah, being a perfected human being.
Yeah.
That's essentially what the story is about. Becoming that.
Yeah.
Becoming that. And so, you know, to follow your own personal dharma is to understand your own temperament, your own li, to use Taoist terminology, your own organic pattern. And so they would be one of those three yogic paths. And then to expand that and to study and so forth and so on, you know. This is why certain people may like going to kirtan, but some others want to just have peace and tranquility and go away and read a text. And but our lives can actually fluctuate a little bit between that. Sometimes you want to go to kirtan, and sometimes you just want solitude. I mean, there is a certain rhythm in our lives, but some people become very like addicted to certain ways over the other, right? Yes. So you and I, our life has usually been mainly being in isolation and study and meditation and kind of not engaged in a lot of group activities. We've done a lot of that before, but it's kind of not our thing, right? So we stick to what we are.
Yeah, what we feel most comfortable,
Yeah.
and what we feel most effective on
The spiritual path,
on progress and learning
Yeah.
things.
Well, one thing that we need to highlight is that when we look at the evolution of Eastern thought, and we look at, so if we look at like they talk about in the Bhagavad Gita and also the Upanishads, and if you don't progress to Vedanta, then that's because Vedanta is where moksha and all of that happens. And so when we look at the evolution, like if we look at Vedanta and we look at also Buddhism, they're very similar, and they all happened around the same time. And some scholars will debate that maybe Vedanta took a lot of ideas from Buddhism or vice versa. We don't need to get into that. But the idea is that the heightened aspect of the spiritual path is to inquire into the nature of your own existence. And it's hard to do that through kirtan. It's hard to do that when you're out ploughing the fields and, so forth and so on. Not that, not all of us have that opportunity. But even if you are still ploughing the fields, you still can inquire into your own existence, right? While you are ploughing, you have plenty of time to inquire. And so, but like those paths are much more related to mind sciences, as we've mentioned on the podcast many times. And so that's actually the evolution of, or the spiritual progress people need to make, is to get into those levels that Vedanta and Buddhism are touching upon, and Taoism as well.
Yeah, that's something I think a lot of us need to understand. It like, although bhakti or karmic path may resonate with you more, scientifically our brain actually functions in a way that the perfect balance, in a sense that you need to have an active, like you said, rhythm before. You need to have the active moment in your daily life to activate certain part of your brain. But without getting into deep silence through like a deep concentration, the brain doesn't function at an optimal level. So that to balance that out, you will have to have some allocate time for yourself to stay in quietude and with the intense focus and concentration. That could be just a deep sitting meditation, or just reading some serious texts and things like that. And in that way, you can balance your brain, and in only that way you will be able to fully understand what you're trying to get to, right?
Yeah.
Like, even if you understand these paths and you follow the bhakti or karmic path, if you don't understand what you're doing that for, ultimately there is no use for it.
No
right?
use for it, yeah. Exactly. And even if you look at it from Patanjali Yoga, right? Like, if you were only going to kirtan and you're out of your mind and you're, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna all the time, if you look at it from a Patanjali yogic perspective, you're never going to get to samadhi. You're never going to go through, because if you look at Ashtanga yoga, if you look at the 8 limbs, they've got nothing actually, they're not related to going out of your mind at kirtan. And not saying that isn't a good experience in itself, but the energy is different, right?
Yes.
Because the energy of going through the 8 stages or the 8 limbs of yoga is a refining process to experience chitta, vritti, nirodha, the cessations of the whirlpools of the mind. If you're at kirtan and the energy is different, the energy is high, the vibration is high. But if you're following the yogic paths, and again, yoga in some sense is around sort of that time, the evolution of Vedanta and Buddhism and all of that, Patanjali yoga I mean here, is that you go through this process of refinement of the consciousness to stillness,
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people, I think, misunderstand the trance
Yeah.
state of mind. In a trance is as if something they're experiencing enlightenment or something like that.
No.
But that, I think that's literally is a momentary hype. That is, like you mentioned, the energy. Energetically, you were a little bit out of your analytical mind that could caused by like a circumstantial with a lot of people and music and things like that. You only experience that feeling of trance. It's only because of that outside the help, and you are only, I think, hyped by that situation, and it's very momentary.
Yeah.
But moksha is not momentary.
No.
It's always there, and you are always conscious of it, and you're always underlying state of mind is that state of mind, right? So yeah, people misunderstand that trance is as a very spiritual experience, but not quite.
And it's still an experience,
Yes.
right? It's still an experience, which means it's still a dual thing. It's not moksha, like what you're saying. Moksha is a stable reality where you're not like doing all of this sort of stuff. And trance, in a sense, is like it's like you said, it's momentary. There's nothing that is going to. It's not going to last. It's like I get a lot of questions about Kundalini. A Kundalini experience is not enlightenment. It's an experience of the energies within your being. You know, because you're unblocking certain blockages within your being, which is allowing dormant energies to move. Doesn't mean you're enlightened. It's like having a psychedelic experience. You have a psychedelic experience and you come out of it, and people sometimes think, I'm going to be enlightened after this, and they're still the same. It's just the way it is, right? The moksha or nirvana is a state of tranquility and stillness, essentially, that you not harness, that you reside in, which allows you to have a meditative mind in all life. So it's kind of like that idea of Zen, right? Like you're fully present and you act appropriately to each and every situation, but you're completely shanti on the inside. Your interior is shanti, even though you might be frowning. Your interior is shanti. And so that's where a lot of people confuse it, because, and again, this comes down to materialism, right? It comes down to, oh, look, he's in trance. It's still a materialistic thing because you can visualize it, you can see it.
Still, like an object.
It's still an object,
It's an object.
It's an object, yeah.
And a lot of spiritual teachers of even today are saying that state of mind of moksha is to be not to have an extreme joy or happiness or extreme sorrow or despair. Like you read earlier in the quote, the evenness of your mind. It's always kind of there's evenness. It's stable. There's no extreme excitement or extreme sadness. It's always stable. Your mind is always calm and tranquil.
Yep.
And that's the state that we're talking about.
Of course, that's Chitta-vritti Nirodha, right? That's the cessations of the whirlpools of the mind. You're not moved here or there. Like what Swami Sarvapriyananda said, Gita is basically talking about the one with steady wisdom or a steady mind. You know, it's steady. You are steady. You're not all over the shop, and you're not in trance states every now and again. Like you've gone beyond all of that, you know, and you're not even attracted to that anymore, because they are momentary experiences. And the idea of the turiya, the fourth state of consciousness, is non-experiential. And that's where the Atman and that's where moksha and that reside. It's the non-experiential. You know, that's why when people say, have you, and we all do this unconsciously, have you experienced enlightenment? Using experience in relation to enlightenment is actually not right, because enlightenment itself isn't an experience. Yeah. It's our natural state that we come back into abidance with.
Yeah, a lot of people think of enlightenment as in like a fireworks event, right?
No, it's not.
But that's not what it is. And people think that the moment that you get enlightened, there's going to be like a lightning and thunderstorm. But it's not like that at all. Again, like a lot of people would already know the Zen saying, before enlightenment, chop the wood and fetch water. After enlightenment, chop the wood and fetch water. So life goes on.
Life goes on, but you have realized. See?
That's right.
But life goes on. You still have things to do. You still have to fetch water. You still have, as a physical organism, you have to do what's necessary. Do a little bit of exercise, move the body around. But you yourself are not touched by the drama and the affairs of the world. You are not even attracted to that anymore because you've realized the nature of existence itself. And that's the big difference between an ordinary person who hasn't come back into their true nature as opposed to a sage. And that's why that they can just, be happy with what they have, and they know what the nature of the game is. And we're all out there going chasing, the bright things in life and thinking that enlightenment is this big event. And a lot of these ideas, as you know, come from reading mythology and that about there are stories in Zen and Taoism, where they experience enlightenment or satori, and the mountains were moved and this and that. But the authors in that of those texts are, it's mythological. It's to accentuate what the experience is. But what we do, and this again is a big problem with New Age spirituality in the modern world, is that everything's taken literal. It's like the bad habits of Christians, right? They take everything literal in the story.
Walk on the water.
Yeah. And you still see people try and justify it. Oh, yeah, but he had cities and this and that. And it's like, come on. You're missing a deeper message in the story because you're looking at it in a literal sense. Your mind is fixated still on the material world. You're not looking at nature from a deeper perspective. And so that's one of the things. That's why people start thinking about enlightenment in a fantastical way, or they start confusing enlightenment with Kundalini experiences or having a psychedelic experience. But again, we're still using the word experience, which doesn't relate to enlightenment, doesn't relate to moksha or nirvana.
Experience is all well and good, but in the end, that state of consciousness has to become part of your being.
Yeah. It's at the nature of your being anyway.
Yes.
But you just don't realize it.
Yeah.
Your ego is the blockage that stops you from understanding that. The jiva is that blockage from stopping the Atman.
Yeah. And again, in the Bhagavad Gita story, that not expecting any return from your action, that is, I think that's very difficult thing to achieve too, I think, because whatever we do, instantly, it's almost like an automatic reaction of our mind that whatever you do or whatever you think that you're gonna be doing, instantly you think what's gonna come afterwards, right? And we decide or judge that behavior is whether good or bad from your instant imagination of what will cause.
Yeah.
So that not to expect anything in return, or what is going to happen from you acting or behaving in a certain way or do certain things is something it's very difficult. And I think to be able to do that, you need to accept and trusting on the job that you're doing, right?
Yeah, of course, yeah, no doubt. Well, that is where the Gita and Zen Buddhism are related. Because if you're familiar with Zen Buddhism, and this is not just with Zen Buddhism, it's with other paths as well, is that people ask when they enter a monastery or they get into Zen teachings, so we're meditating to get to the goal, right? You're just meditating for meditating's sake. What? But shouldn't we have a target or a goal? No. That's where you've gone wrong in your life. You have a target, you have a goal. We've got to get rid of all of that. Why do you ride a bike? Just to ride, and maybe if I want to get to A to B or something like this. Well, this is how you got to think about meditation. You meditate for meditation's sake. You got to get out of this linear idea of a goal. Because enlightenment is not some place to reach. It's what you already are, but you've forgotten, see? Because you've bought into this whole idea of this person that you think you are. That's why Hubert Benoit said in Zen the Supreme Doctrine that Nirvana is, always ever present. But the problem is we're chasing the experience, and what happens is in the chase, you can't see it. You don't know where it is. You look, it's like looking for a fugitive that never existed. We've got to find this guy who killed the cat, and the cat's perfectly fine. The guy's out of his mind.
That's so difficult place to be, because I don't know, like for probably a lot of people, we all have grown up in a way that there's always reason why you're doing certain things. To get rewarded mainly, to get praised, to simply just to get something done. And that gets heightened once we entered school, right? There's always a reason why you're doing certain things. And we get educated in that way as well. And then so that our way of thinking and habit of thinking becomes that way. And it's been formed that way since a very young age. So that it is a very foreign and new concept to think of doing something for the sake of doing it. Or doing itself has a greater meaning than what will come after doing that, right? And so that it's very new to our way of thinking, but something we definitely eventually want to break that habit of thinking.
Well, the way it was languaged to me when I was younger is you got to think about, this is in the Zen sense, is you got to think about meditation like just washing the dishes. Why do you wash the dishes? You don't wash the dishes to attain a certain goal. Like there's nothing, like it's dirty. You got to wash the dishes because later you're going to have to eat, So that's the same with enlightenment. Same with meditation. Is that why do we meditate? And as Shunryu Suzuki said, you meditate because that's what Buddhas do. Just as dishwashers dishwash. But then, like you said, like our whole mentality is geared towards a linear outcome, achieving something. And that's where, essentially, like my book Enlightenment now talks a lot about that, about you have to get out of that idea of goals and reaching somewhere, because that somewhere doesn't exist.
The thing is, like, since we all train that way, we're doing something for something, right?
Yeah.
But so in that way of thinking, from achieving certain goals and things like that, that's where you find the meaning of what you've done for that goal, right? So you're doing something to achieve the goal. So your ultimate meaning resides in achieving that goal itself, right? So that if you backflip that way of thinking, then what for? It'd be a little bit like an empty feeling, wouldn't it? Because there is no more goal. But I think then that in that way, everything upside down, that way of thinking is for you to realize that is the nature of being. That is why. Because sake of meditation is to sit and to remind yourself of your own existence and experience what's within you, deep inside of your mind or consciousness during that deep state of concentration, right? But so that for some people, they want to get to a certain goal from practicing meditation. For example, I want to achieve a certificate after a 10-day meditation course. This is my goal, so that I'm doing that. And a lot of people are actually like that. But instead thinking that let's say there is no reward after all these training or whatever. But that process of itself, of meditating, sitting in silence, that itself is to give you, not to give you, that itself is the nature of being. So that's where the greater meaning is.
Yeah, not in getting a certificate.
Not getting certificate. Like you said, it's you are chasing the non-existent fugitive. That fugitive is not there, was never there, but you are chasing basically for nothing. So that you hear this a lot from people who like achieved big goal and things like that. And a lot of them actually say that they worked so hard for so long to achieve certain things, but once they achieved it, it actually didn't have that much of an ecstatic feeling.
No.
In the end, the journey that they gone through was what was so meaningful for them. And again, it sounds cliche, but I think that's what we need to change the way of our thinking. I think that it became so like a concrete habit, but we need to break it so that we can transform our way of being.
Well, that's why I mentioned in Enlightenment now, like I think it's the last chapter, the journey is the destination is the journey. I know that sounds like a cliche, but that's kind of what you're getting at. And that's the way it is, actually. You know, and even like when I think about writing my books, it's all well and good to get a publishing contract, but what you actually more remember is the moments that you wrote the book. Like I remember Enlightenment now. You and I living in a small little cottage in Sarapi outside of Chiang Mai, hot as blazing. You're making me the hottest food in the world, and it's 45 degrees, and I'm like out of my mind.
Didn't know much about the food. And,
Thai food.
Yeah, Thai food.
And you know, like, so there's all of these wonderful experiences that are had during the process of those things. And so that's kind of, that acts sort of as a metaphor for how we are in our spiritual practices. And what happens is a lot of people, when they come across, especially Eastern spirituality, is a lot of people get depressed because they come from that mentality of attaining goals and achievement, where, as you know, Eastern spirituality pulls the rug from underneath you and makes you humble. You're not going to get nothing from this. What do you want from this? Well, you're not going to get anything. You know, and sometimes that's what masters will say to you. Why are you here? I want to attain enlightenment. Well, that's not what you should be here for.
It's a bit like heartbreaking.
Yeah, a bit heartbreaking. Yeah.
You know what, like,
because then other people say, "Well, why should we be here?"
Yeah. Like, it is a bit heartbreaking to hear that. But I think that's what the human life is really. Like, it's not to get somewhere in a very linear sense, especially nowadays. Like, let's say, for example, social media platforms. You upload a post or a picture or something like that, and you want the instant, lots of likes and comments and positive comments and things like that. And from that, you get a lot of positive energy, and that's
dopamine hit.
Yes, that's why you kind of get addicted to it. So we are living in that sort of age that everything, the reaction is very instant and so quick, so that we lose a lot of patience. That kind of quality, like patience, resilience, this kind of quality is kind of slowly disappearing. So when you tell someone like came to the monastery and saying, I want to get enlightened, that's why I'm here. Oh, well, that you're in the wrong place.
In the wrong place.
And there's no such thing. It's heartbreaking. But in reality, like, trees and birds don't know anything about social media. They just exist. They just go through the course of nature. And actually, so are we. The humans are the same. In fact, that we are here to realize nature of our being, and that is that is the process that we need to go through. Again, at the end of the day, achieving goal in these things, artificial thing for us to feel good about ourselves, and only fuels our ego, right?
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, see, nature is non-linear, and we are nature. And so we're trying to come back to our nature through a linear process. Doesn't happen.
Yeah.
You have to come back into the non-linear field. And how do you come back into that? Well, you just got to stop doing things. You stop doing things, you just sit there quietly, you allow the bubbles of your mind to subside, and then that essence will begin to emanate through you. It takes time for some people. Some people have a hard shell, like from years of conquering and achieving and doing and just seeking likes on Facebook and stuff like this, and you got to get out. It's the complete backflip. It's diametrically opposed to that mentality.
It's a little bit like a large person try to lose weight kind of thing.
Yeah.
To get that big, it took a certain amount of time, right?
Yeah.
But to get back to slim body,
it could take that amount of time.
Or longer.
Or longer, yeah. So you need to be committed.
Yeah. So the same thing. I think you've lived life in a certain way, and you've been thinking things in a certain manner. So to give a change to it, it takes as long as your lifetime that you've lived that way, or even longer.
Or longer, yeah.
It can be even more difficult because we're talking about the mental things.
Exactly. So to come back to that place is you can't have a mentality of I'm going out to seek this goal. You have to get out of that habit.
Yeah.
And that's what frightens people, right? Because people in some sense they think they need direction. They think they need a target. But what's always been a problem in their life is direction, is a target, has been the problem in their life,
Right.
which has confused them. So if you want to confuse them even more, you take all that out. But what that does is it allows you to be more peaceful, right? So like when you go to a monastery, you think, okay, if I'm not here for enlightenment, if that's what the teacher said, why am I here? You're just here to show up every day to meditation. That's what you're here for. And what happens after the weeks and if you're fortunate enough to stay there for months, things begin to, your being begins to change.
Yeah.
So, and you come into resonance with what you were actually seeking in the first place. But you couldn't have got it if you had an aim. Yeah, like a linear aim.
Yeah.
And this is what's happening, especially a lot with New Age spirituality and this and that, is people are coming into it and thinking that they're higher enlightened beings more than ordinary people. And, it's all been warped, over-sensationalized by people who don't understand the traditions, which is very sad, But that's why a lot of New Age people don't delve into Zen and stuff like that, because that gets a bit too much of a hard case for people to, New Age people may mess with Taoism and Hinduism and other Buddhist paths, but maybe not Zen a lot. Because, Zen is pretty direct in explaining that you can't get things through a linear way, and, all of this nonsense that you're doing, like, it's material.
Yeah, Zen path is very strict and very radical, I think. That radical side of it is people find it very harsh somewhat, I think.
And that's what the story in the Bhagavad Gita is like, right? Like Krishna is saying, get out of your mind's habit of thinking about things in kind of linear fashion, in a moralistic fashion, and just do what is required. When you walk into a monastery or an ashram, what is required? Meditation. That's what you do. You wouldn't walk into any of those places if you thought you were wanting to get a hamburger, because you're not going to get that there. Yeah. But if you want meditation and that, and you want contemplation, then you walk into those places, And so that's what Krishna is trying to tell Arjuna, get out of this mindset of you're trying to achieve some sort of outcome with this. And even his outcome in that is he didn't want to fight, right? Because he didn't want to fight his family. And so his way of dealing with it is just to turn away and walk the other way and not face what is required. And so, what is required when you walk into a monastery? Hours and hours and hours of meditation practice, And so that's the way that we all have to approach our life, in that non-linear fashion. Not in this linear, we're going to get moksha through certain means, or the Kundalini is going to give me this experience of enlightenment, and it doesn't, And so that's part of this. That's part of the story,
Yeah, I think the people who get attracted to Kundalini and things like that is that people have this fantastic idea of spirituality, because when they hear real spirituality is to become nothingness, basically. And they get frightened.
Frightened,
right?
yeah. Well, you look at most of the popular people on YouTube, right, who talk about, let's just say, spirituality in air quotes. They talk about it in the over-sensationalized manner, you know, Kundalini and this and that. And you see a lot of people are actually attracted to that. They're not attracted to the reality of spirituality. And sometimes it takes a long people to come back to the reality of spirituality. Like you said, the idea of nothingness and the idea that your persona is an illusion, that frightens people a lot. Because they are attracted to really showing people their personality. Like you said with the certificates, right? Isn't it funny that the underlying motivation for someone to do a meditation course is to show someone else their certificate? And that's the real sad thing. I did a 200-hour yoga course. Here's my certificate. 200 hours? You're not even anywhere on the yogic path. 200 hours is nothing. And you just did it to get a certificate, maybe to have a yoga studio or something like that, but you are nowhere, you know.
Yeah, well, that individual might be really good at physical stretching postures and things like that.
You're only practicing hatha yoga.
Yeah, but it's got really nothing to do with being in actual yogic paths.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, often people confuse yoga with hatha yoga. That's what all yoga is. It's like, no, there's many paths of yoga. And we've been talking about 3 other paths that are completely different from hatha yoga today. The original paths, which are bhakti, karma, and jnana. Hatha come later, you know. So, and that's life. That's not a 200-hour course. You follow the yogic path, that's a life certificate. You know.
I wish sometimes think that I wish there was a different word for it instead of people using the word yoga like really frivolously without really knowing what it is.
It's annoying, isn't it? Like you might hear like someone really famous like Joe Rogan mention yoga, and he's mentioning only yoga in the hatha yoga sense, and that influences other people then to think about yoga in the same sense.
Yes.
And as we know, because we have friends in India, it annoys Indians a lot because yoga means to unite with, to merge with. It doesn't mean to hold hatha yoga asanas. You know, that the asanas are just a part. That's like saying that Tai Chi Chuan is Taoism.
It's Taoism, yes.
And it's not.
And actually, some people believe
People
that
believe
too.
that, yeah. I practice Tai Chi, so I'm a Taoist. No, that's not how it works.
Not entirely, no.
No. That may accentuate your understanding if you understand Taoism.
Yes.
So, yes. So that's pretty much the 3 paths, isn't it, of yoga in relation to finding our Dharma.
Yes.
And yeah, it's about feeling out that process, about feeling, you know, what resonates with you, but also, as we tried to emphasize in this podcast, is about remembering what the point of the Gita and all of the great, not just the Gita, but, you know, all of the great texts of Hinduism is the coming back into accord with enlightenment, moksha. And so even though we may be a bhakti or a karmi, or we practice hatha yoga and this and that, that's not going to guarantee that you're going to attain moksha. You know, you need to have knowledge of the self, knowledge of Brahman. Yeah. And that's where the teachings of Shankara and Gaudapada come in a lot, you know. Yeah. And about understanding also the Upanishads. This is why it's difficult, like, you know, when I mentioned earlier when the British said wanted one holy book, and, you know, the Gita the Bhagavad Gita, because of how like extravagant it is and you know how unique it is, they zeroed in on that one, right? Like where you look at the Upanishads, or even if you look at the Ishvara Gita with about Shiva, these are more geared towards like I shouldn't say that, because the Bhagavad Gita is geared towards that as well, but the Bhagavad Gita is more of like an epic, like a story, where like in the Upanishads there are stories obviously, but like, and in the Ishvara Gita it's kind of a story too, but it's more direct in its approach.
Right.
You know,
whereas the Bhagavad Gita is more like an epic. There's drama.
Yeah.
There is a big landscape of scene that you can imagine.
Yeah. And if you're not intuitive or you're not adept spiritually, you won't get the nature of the story.
That's right. That's why actually a lot of even Indian people themselves believe it's just a story. They take it literally just as a story.
Yeah. So, I would say that, and this is what Vedanta do. Vedanta, because of the Prashanatrahi, the three main texts, you can't just read the Gita and think you're going to understand it. You need to actually read the Brahma Sutras and also the Upanishads. And that gives you a solid foundation of what Vedanta is, the knowledge of the Vedas. Essentially, all of these texts are related to the knowledge of the Vedas, right? The Vedas came first. To be honest, if the British really wanted to explain what the actual holy books of Hinduism were, they probably should have said the Vedas. But the problem, again, is the Vedas are more direct. Again, they are part of the Shruti, what is heard, and then the Smriti came later, right?
And I think the Vedas, the books are too big, too large. So I don't think they could comprehend it all.
No, yeah, they're vast in their knowledge for sure. And again, all of the other, the Puranas and the Mahabharata, the Ramayana, and all that came later because that was kind of the stories, the evolution of the Vedas, So, and Vedanta is kind of the end of all of this knowledge. Well, Vedanta is like the end of the Vedas or the end of the Upanishads, you could say. So the end of the knowledge of what Sanatana Dharma is. And so that's kind of where people should be gravitating more towards, if they're studying the Bhagavad Gita. If you say I'm studying the Bhagavad Gita, then you should be gravitating more towards Vedanta. You should be and not just Advaita Vedanta, you could be gravitating towards Vishishtavaita or Vaita or one of the parts of Vedanta.
The another really fascinating thing about this Hindu text is that once you read it, you can never get it as I've read it, I got the message. Because let's say 5 or 10 years goes by, when you come back around to the same text, it has even more meaning to you, or more deeper meaning. You get to read the space between the lines, so to say. So that it's, as you get mature, even the text itself get mature within yourself as well. I think it's you can just read it over and over again. It'll never be the same to you. I don't think.
No. Well, they're eternal texts, right? They're going to mean something different to you due to your own evolution.
Yes.
And your own psychological capacity to understand or intuit the text. And the Gita is a great book for that. Actually, all three of those books, the Upanishads, the Brahma Sutras, and the Bhagavad Gita, are good. Even if you wanted to go crazy and read the whole Mahabharata, but that's you need to take a few years off for that one. So.
Yeah, you need to be patient, committed.
Patient and committed. So, that's basically the story of Arjuna and Krishna. I think we sort of dived into the significance of that story. There's so much more we could talk about with the Bhagavad Gita. Again, this is could be an ongoing series, we don't know, but there's a lot to understand, and we may do other texts in the future, we don't know, but a lot of people are interested in Krishna and Arjuna, right? So, and that's pretty much it. So guys, I hope you enjoyed, and we'll see you guys next week.